Hello, I'm Bill Blackledge, Director of 2B Landscape Consultancy. I've been advocating SuDS for around about 20 years and incorporating them into our projects whenever possible.
And I'm Amanda McDermott. I'm a Chartered Landscape Architect for 2B Consultancy. I'm also a Flow Calderdale founder member, and my house in Mythen Road was flooded on Boxing Day 2015. So our talk today is a SWOT analysis of sustainable drainage generally, focusing on urban sustainable drainage and lessons from the award-winning You Can Slow the Flow project, for which 2B was responsible.
So natural flood management is generally what happens in rural context, and SuDS generally happens in developed areas. We champion both. 2,000 years ago, the Calder Valley would have been a wooded valley, a natural environment with many layers which would effectively slow the flow. Section 2 of the slide shows what happens when you have a developed situation with impermeable surfaces, buildings, paving and roads, and if you then add climate change effects to that, you have a recipe for problems when you have serious rainfall. And in the slow the flow, which is the bottom image, we accept obviously that we need the buildings and the roads, but we have to try within all of that development to mimic natural systems in those spaces, and you'll be able to see examples of those kinds of features throughout the Slow the Flow website.
So what are sustainable drainage systems? So like natural flood management, the aim of sustainable drainage systems are to hold stormwater where it falls and to release it slowly. And we need this on all new development so that we deal with the effects of the development. We also need to retrofit sustainable drainage on existing property to help address the problems that we have. And you can see on the slow the flow graph that we're trying to make that curve shallower so that we come underneath the flood level. So the idea behind the You Can Slow the Flow project is to explain these principles to the local public, explaining that many small interventions to slow runoff could actually result in a significant amount of water being held temporarily stored in the urban areas during storm events. So it's about having quality information displayed in a readable way, and having that attractive information available via websites and physical information leaflets. It's an information project because Slow the Flow Calderdale can't have a large enough impact on our own. So rather than focusing on building physical projects ourselves, we can encourage lots of smaller projects which can have a big impact.
So this next slide shows our SWOT analysis. We're going to do a parallel SWOT where I will discuss SuDS generally.
And I'll talk about the You Can Slow the Flow project specifically.
The Syria SuDS manual describes what it refers to as the 4 pillars of sustainable drainage. Quantity, as was shown in the earlier slide, quality, what is the benefit that you can gain in terms of water quality through using sustainable drainage systems. Biodiversity and amenity are the other main pillars, but added to that, we've included on the right hand side of the image cost, because with sustainable drainage, the drainage system is the landscape and the landscape is the drainage system. So SuDS can actually be cheaper. It's not as if drainage suddenly becomes an add-on cost to the development. And the other thing that it brings to us as landscape professionals is it shows us that, and our clients, that landscape has a purpose beyond simply looking beautiful and bringing aesthetic benefits. So an example of this is shown on the next slide with a scheme that we designed at Hull University. It was when it was presented to us, It was a conventional drainage system with a very large tank at one end of the system. We carried out a SuDS feasibility study, and we found through doing that apart from all the benefits that we've talked about, those 4 pillars and so on, coming back to the cost issue, we could save £100,000 on a £6 million build cost. So that's 66% of the total drainage budget, or 1.6% of the total build cost, so not an insignificant amount of money. So the growing consensus, and I list some of the examples on this next slide from the likes of the Welsh Government and so on, is that SuDS is cheaper for the reasons that I've mentioned. SuDS is the landscape, SuDS maintenance is landscape maintenance.
So in terms of strengths for the You Can Slow the Flow project, we believe we can have a greater impact from encouraging many schemes than from doing a few with limited land ownership and capital and things. Organising physical projects is quite resource heavy in terms of both cost and time. So if we use the information project, we can achieve more with lower cost. And the information exists now, so having set that up, it as well as us pushing that information forward, it now has a life of its own through the internet and partnership organisations. We have quite a wide audience through the support of other local organisations that help us to disseminate the information.
So moving on to an example of a weakness of SuDS, if we have limited space, and in this example slide you can see that there's not a great deal of space in the public realm on this fairly new housing scheme in it's just the northwest of Sorby Bridge. But one thing that we did notice when we looked at it was the amount of garden space that's available. So sometimes it's just a question of how you think about the scheme overall. The other big issue that has been a problem with SuDS has been the question of adoption. And after the 2007 floods that affected obviously a great deal of Yorkshire, a great deal of Gloucestershire and so on, probably the most serious floods that we've had across a broad area, the Flood and Water Management Act of 2010 was meant to establish standards for adoption and maintenance of SuDS. Unfortunately, it was that Act, Schedule 3 of that Act, was effectively abandoned by the British government in 2015. One of the issues around SuDS that we illustrate in this chart is that if we only include sustainable drainage and manage water quantities in new developments, we will only be effectively dealing with a small proportion of the property that will be in the UK. For example, here we've got the timeline to 2050, because we've got so much existing building that needs to be considered as well. So the answer there is that we need to think about retrofit to existing development as well as new design of sustainable drainage on new developments.
And in terms of weaknesses for the You Can Slow the Flow project, that is fairly similar. We're fighting a huge proportion of already built environment, so encouraging retrofit is even more challenging than new build. There's also a problem with information itself that can't change anything. You need people to act on that information in order for change to happen. And one of the problems is that it's not about preventing your own property from flooding, so you need people upstream of the flooding to understand that it's them that needs to take action. And unfortunately, the motivation of even the most dedicated and caring of neighbours will dwindle even more quickly than that of flood victims following flood events.
So in terms of opportunities, obviously we've got the Serious SuDS manual that we've already referred to, which is a fabulous and extensive document to help us designing sustainable drainage. We've also got on the immediate horizon Sewers for Adoption. So it's Sewers for Adoption 8, and what's happened there is that the water authorities have come together, recognised that the lack of any process of adoption in England is a major problem, and it's going to become a major problem going forward for them as well as for the communities they serve. So they have created SuDS for Adoption 8, which enables them, or will enable them, to adopt open watercourses conveying water in the way that SuDS systems do. So that actually opens up a great possibility in terms of SuDS design being more widely adopted. And on the next slide for opportunities, I refer to the quote from Syria, who provide a lot of the guidance on SuDS, which says that provided SuDS design is considered early enough in the development process, there's no reason why it can't be the norm in all developments.
So, opportunities for the You Can Slow the Flow project. Because the information already exists, we can respond to opportunities as they arise. So, for example, I mentioned we work with partners, particularly through the Source partnership. So, for example, Calderdale Council, we have a good relationship with their communications department, and they let us know when they're running a campaign, if they have hashtags that we should use on social media, etc. And then we have the kind of reciprocal, you know, they'll retweet our stuff and help us to spread the word. The next one's a bit of a sensitive issue, because tragic as flood events are, for example the 16th of March near-miss flooding, they do bring the issue to the fore. So if we're able to respond to those in a sensitive way, we can galvanise action to help alleviate the next flood event. One of our new opportunities is our new case studies library, so a section on our website that's devoted to SuDS case studies that can help to prove to local people that these things are achievable in your own environment, and here's how people have done these things locally. And what we're hoping for is a potential kind of snowball effect as these schemes pop up through the valley, and people see them in real life, see them online, and think, you know, I could do that in these schemes that I have an influence on, or in my own environment at home. On the next slide, we've got one of our case studies, which is at Hebden Bridge Town Hall, the venue of the conference. And in the courtyard at Hebden Bridge Town Hall, we've got rain garden planters that have been retrofitted to existing downpipes. And that's been done in partnership with the Calder Rivers Trust, and kindly funded by the Postcode Lottery, Postcode Local Trust, and installed by volunteers. So it's a real good partner project, and we've got a bespoke monitoring system for those planters, where we've got a video and rain gauges at the top and bottom of the planter, and hot off the press results confirm that they are really slowing the flow. And when we compare the graph on the next slide to the perfect SuDS hydrograph, and what we're trying to achieve, you can see the similarity in that graph that we're finding. And there's the loop video, which hopefully you can see on the slide. It's speeded up, and if you watch the inlet, it fills up more quickly and higher up to the black line. And then as you watch the outlet, you can see that it fills up more slowly and has a lower peak level. So we look at that in detail on the next slide. We can see the orange line is the outlet, and that's the longer, shallower curve with a lower peak and a more gradual release of water. So the results show a delay in peak flow of about 4 minutes and a reduction in the peak level of about 57%. So in the area under the blue graph runs for about 1 hour 18 in total, and the area under the orange graph runs for nearly 2 hours. So there's a delay to the end of that flow, even on such a small scale, of 53 minutes, and an increase in the overall outfall time of about 50%. So all of that essentially means that there's significant implications if Slow the Flow Calderdale and the You Can Slow the Flow project can be successful in encouraging a widespread uptake of these principles in the Calder Valley. So threats to the You Can Slow the Flow project. Public priorities when it's not raining. That, you know, flooding is not highest on my agenda, and my house does flood when it's not raining. That it's easy to let this drop to the bottom of your list. We're also reliant on voluntary activity for the most part, and management team capacity. We're all busy people. We also are not marketing experts, so we're sort of doing our best to get this project out in the best ways we know how. We're getting much better at it, but we're not coming from that marketing background. And there's always, you know, there's not enough financial incentive. There's not enough selfless incentive. So there's, you know, we're sort of working against those kind of barriers to doing this in a widespread way. And everybody thinks somebody else will do it. And actually it relies on a lot of us doing this in order for it to work.
So in terms of the threats to wider adoption of SuDS, the biggest threat is just the traditional mindset of builders, developers, architects, engineers. We've always done it this way, why should we change? Well, we know the answer to that. The answer why they should change is because of climate change. It's changing around them. They've got to change to meet it. The other thing is that there are myths like, oh well, you can only do SuDS where you have permeable ground conditions where the water can drain into the ground. That's not true. You can have completely impermeable ground conditions and you just allow the water to be stored temporarily in swales and basins and then drain down perhaps over a day after the storm. You don't need permeable ground. And looking at the image, I was looking for an example of housing development, and I was just drawn to the irony of the developers' marketing, and it's such a constant amongst all housing developers is that they always show trees in their development images and have some Arcadian name for the development. In this case it's Orchard Gardens, but when it actually comes down to it, how many trees get planted, this is something that we and they really need to work on. Deliver what you say you're going to do, not just the marketing image that you think will sell the property. The other threat is that we don't have sufficient strong national guidance, as we've talked about, the abandoning of the Flood and Water Management Schedule 3. We have the likes of the National Planning Policy Framework, which says that major development should incorporate sustainable drainage systems, and then qualifies it with statements like, unless there's clear evidence that it will be inappropriate. Yeah, okay, you don't want to put it in where it's inappropriate, but it does potentially provide loopholes that really shouldn't be there. The biggest single threat that we face is doing nothing at all differently in the face of climate change. So we need to see these change attitudes coming forwards. So to summarise in broad terms about SuDS, we see SuDS and natural flood management as important elements of green infrastructure, and this diagram shows how those aspects combine to a whole way of looking at green infrastructure. It brings multiple benefits. It needs to be included with both new build and retrofit, as we mentioned earlier on. And in particular, we need to be looking at soft landscape-based SuDS. What we want to try to get away from is conventional drainage systems with massive amounts of plastic crates in the ground, because A, it costs more, and B, it can hardly be defined as sustainable, can it? We've seen that SuDS is proven to be cost effective, and we have the tools through things like the Syria guidance, and also that major adoption issues may be overcome very soon in England by the SuDS for Adoption 8, and it's very clear that momentum is growing to make these kinds of approaches the norm and not the exception.
So yeah, We are convinced that urban SuDS is worth pursuing, and as with so many things, the impact comes when the principles are utilised in a much more widespread way than at present. But there's hope, because precedents such as wearing seatbelts, not smoking indoors, and recently awareness of plastic use all tell us that sea change of the scale required can actually happen. And it needs a top-down direction from government ideally, at a national level ideally, combined with force of public opinion. But it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario, so trusted community groups are well placed to empower the public with giving them that knowledge and encouraging them to get involved. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.